Welcome to the Sikha this week. We're going to be learning Sikha Aleph of Vayelech on page 127 and Chelek Yudalit. In this Sikha, the Rabbi is going to discuss a very interesting Tosefta regarding the mitzvah of Hakel. The Inyan Hakel Shebe Parsha Seina. So regarding the mitzvah of Hakel in this week's Parsha, Isa B'Tosefta, it says in the Tosefta as follows. Oisai Hayoim, on that day when they were gathering the Yidden to come to the Beis HaMikdash, Kayanim Oimdim B'Gdarim U'Pirtzais. The Kayanim would stand by the gates and by the breaches, V'Chatzaitzres Shel Zav B'Yedeyim, and they had golden trumpets in their hands, Taikin U'Meriyin V'Taikin, and they would blow a Tkiya, a Trua, and Tkiya to announce to the Yidden to come to the Hakel, L'Hakel Asa'am Al Beis HaMikdash. Then the Tosefta says, Kol koyin she'ein biyodeh chatzaitzres, a koyin that does not have a trumpet and he's not standing there and blowing with a trumpet, oimrin, you say, doim ezeh she'ein koyinu. It looks like this person is not a koyin. Because he's not doing this, he is not doing the job of a koyin, and it looks like he's not a koyin. Tzarech lahavin. So the question here is, Ikir inyan ha-kayanim harei ulamoid l'sharis bebeis hamikdash. What's the main mitzvah of a kayan? A kayan is a servant. He's supposed to serve in the Beis HaMikdash. Ukemuvua berambam sha'kayanim huvdalo la'avodas hakarbonis. They're separated from any other work, and their focus is just to do the avodah of karbonis. V'imkein ma'i sheichusam ha'miyuchedes shel ha-kayanim l'mitzvahs hakel. What's the special connection of Kayanim to the mitzvah of Hakel? Ubefrat that Kiyas Chatzaitzres b'chutzes Yerushalayim, blowing Chatzaitzres in the outskirts of Yerushalayim, Shaiserak Hechshel mitzvahs Hakel. This was a preparation to get Yidden to come for the Hakel. It's not even the mitzvah of Hakel itself, it's just bringing the Yidden. Litkaya b'Chatzaitzres l'Hakel, blowing with the Chatzaitzres to gather the people. What's the special connection of the Kayin to this mitzvah? And the connection of the Kayin to this mitzvah is so much so. This is a proof to the very fact that he is a Kayin. As the Tosefta says, a Kayin that does not have this trumpet, it's as if this individual is not a Kayin, he's not acting like a Kayin. So not only do we see that this is a very important part, a very important job of the Kayin, but if a Kayin doesn't do this, then we consider him as if it looks like he's not a Kayin. What's the connection of this Inyan to what a Kayin's Aveda is all about? The Yuvan Bahaktim Bia Klolis Inyan HaKahuna. So the Rebbe says, let's take a closer look at what Kahuna is all about. So we know what it says, that they're l'sharis and huvdalu and for karbanis, as the Rebbe brought before. But here, the Rebbe is going to bring from another place, in Parshas V'zeis HaBracha, where we could see a different angle of what a kain is really all about. Hinei b'kainim ksiv, it says by the kainim, yasimu ketayra ba'apecha v'kolol al mizbechecha. That the kainim are makriv the ketayras in the Beis HaMikdash, that's the ketayra, and the karbonis, the kol ha-mizbechecha, referring to the karbonis. So, besides the karbonis, the only other one of the avedis that the pasuk here specifies separately is ketayres. Move on, shechashivas miyechedes ba'avedis ha-ketayres hanasas al-yedei ha-kayanim. So it's understood that the ketayres stands out amongst the aveda of the kayanim. That is, it's chashuv, it's unique regarding the Kayinim's Aved in the Beis HaMikdash. Ubam is bate teichen avedasa. The whole content of what a Kayin does in the Beis HaMikdash is expressed specifically through the Ketayres. So a lot of the rest of the Sikha here will be discussing this point. Where do you see Dafke in the Ketayres expressed what the Kayinim's Aved is more than any of the other Avedis in the Beis HaMikdash? Hinei b'sefri ala pasuk nefarish. The Sefri on this pasuk of Yasimu Ketayra Ba'apecha says, Yasimu Ketayra Zu Ketayres, that refers to the Ketayres, Shahayu Machnisim B'Yom HaKippurim Lifnai V'Lifnim. It refers specifically to the Ketayres that's being brought in the Kodesh HaKadoshim on Yom Kippur. So now based on this Sefri we see Even another point, not only the Ketaitis in general, we're talking specifically about the Ketaitis that the Kohen Gadol brings in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Ki av shebachlalis, even if in general, kol inyan HaKetaitis, meir al teichen avedes HaKohenim, the Ketaitis in general shows on the content of the Aveda that the Kohenim do. V'adarabeh, Ketaitis Yom Kippurim, harei rak b'Kohen Gadol. The Ketaitis on Yom Kippur is only brought by the Kohen Gadol, not by all Kohenim. Because beprotius, but nevertheless, at a closer examination, the Ketaitis the Yom Kippurim yeshnoi inyan miyuchad. The Ketaitis of Yom Kippur has something that's unique. Shabai chaluki miketaitis l'chol hashana, and it's different than the Ketaitis of the rest of the year. Ubai bali de bitui toichin miyuchad ba'avedas hakuna b'chlal. And in the Ketaitis of Yom Kippur is expressed something unique and special in the Aveda of Kohenim, in general, all Kohenim, not only the Kohen Gadol. Ela shebepayil nasas al yedei hamiyuchad shebe Kohenim Kohen Gadol. Bepayil, this Ketaitis on Yom Kippur was brought through the Kohen Gadol, which is the miyuchad of the Kohenim. But really, it's expressing the Aveda of the Kohenim in general in the Beis HaMikdash. And the Rabbi brings an example. K'moisha Kohen Gadol maitzi b'zeh kol ha-Kohenim hu ha-Gadol me'echav al derech shemetzinu b'mitzvos atluyas b'melech. Just like a Kohen Gadol is maitzi the rest of the Kohenim with the Avedas that only he does, similar to what we find that a king, the mitzvahs that are for a melech, when he does them, he's being maitzi the rest of Klal Yisrael. So over here as well, this Ketaitis that's brought in Yom Kippur in the Kodesh HaKadoshim is really shayach. It's a special inyan that expresses the teichen of the Aveda of the Kohenim B'chlal. And the Kohen Gadol is doing it for the Kohenim. So, let's understand what's the Ketaitis B'chlal and what is unique about the Ketaitis in Yom Kippur. Min achilukim sheben Ketaitis t'chol hashana v'di Yom Kippurim. One of the differences between the Ketaitis all year round and the Ketaitis of Yom Kippur is l'das HaRambam, according to the Rambam's opinion, in leinosan the Ketaitis the Yom Kippurim es ha'esev sheshmoi v'inyanai maila oshan. If you don't put in the Ketaitis on Yom Kippur a grass or a herb that its name and what it accomplishes is maila oshan, it causes a lot of smoke to come up, chayiv misa. So then you chayiv misa for not making the Ketaitis properly. Masha'en came be Ketaitis t'chol hashana, which is not true regarding the Ketaitis during the rest of the year. Even if you didn't put in this Esav, you're supposed to put it in all year. But even if you didn't put it in the Ketaitis, so then it's not makid, you're not chayiv misa. So this is one of the ingredients, a unique detail regarding the Ketaitis of Yom Kippur, that you have to have this Esav, this grass, that will cause maila oshan, to bring up a smoke, which creates a special aroma. Ubezeh yumtak, Pirish HaSefri, sheyesimu Ketaitis ba'apecha, mayri b'Ketaitis Yom Kippurim. This will explain better why the Sefri says that Yesimu Ketaitis ba'apecha is referring to Yom Kippur. What's the remez? Where do you see over here that it's referring specifically to Yom Kippur? Ki ha'pasuk medaber b'simas hainu ba'aliyas ha'Ketaitis ba'apecha. The fact that the Ketaitis brings about an aroma. There's a smoke, an aroma that comes up and it enters into your apecha, which refers to the nose. V'aliyas ashan ha'Ketaitis nasas al yedei ha'mayla oshan. And what brings that aroma, what brings the smoke to come up? It's this ingredient, this grass, she'ikra yukanal b'yom kippurim, which even though it has to always be put in, but primarily it has to be in Yom Kippur, then it's ma'akiv. She'azuli yikuva b'chiyav misa. So the remez of ba'apecha hints to the fact that we're talking about the Ketaitis of Yom Kippur. That's this ingredient. We have a unique ingredient that is ma'akiv dafka Yom Kippur. Why? Because of maila oshan. It brings up smoke. So the question here is, Ma ben Ketaitis the Yom Kippurim l'Ketaitis t'chol hashana. What's the difference between the Ketaitis of Yom Kippur and the rest of the year? Shedafki b'Yom Kippurim chama kol kach esreina shel ha'mayla oshan. That on Yom Kippur, not having this grass and not having the maila oshan, that will be ma'akiv the whole thing, so much so that you chayiv misa. What's so critical about this ingredient that in Yom Kippur, without it you chayiv misa? So to understand this, the Rebbe will first bring to explain what's b'chlal the whole content of the mitzvah of Ketaitis done in the Beis HaMikdash. Harambam b'meir nevuchim mevayer tam mitzvah Keteiros. So the Rambam explains what is the reason for this mitzvah of Keteiros. Shila tovas hareach bebeis HaMikdash. It's to improve the aroma in the Beis HaMikdash. Why? What's the issue? Because by nasis avedas shchita, they would shech the animals, their chituch basar, cutting the meat, rechitzas evarim apnimiyim, cutting the inside organs of the animals, sreifa v'chulu, burning the parts of the karbanis on the mizbeach. So all of this creates a not very pleasant smell. L'chein tzrichen l'kteiros leheitev reach bebeis hamikdash. So you need the kteiros to improve the smell in the Beis HaMikdash. V'reach ha'ivdim bay, and the smell of the people that are doing the Aveda. That's the idea of the kteiros. It brought in a geschmacke aroma, pleasant aroma into the Beis HaMikdash. That's the Rambam and Meir Nevuchim in the simple pshat of what kteiros is about. Now move on. She'en kavanas HaRambam she'avaras reach hara kipshuta hikol atam l'Aveda gedela hazu. The Rambam does not mean to say that kteiros, which is considered to be an Aveda gedela, it's one of the greatest Avedas in the Beis HaMikdash, is only for this reason, in the simple sense, to improve the smell in the Beis HaMikdash. Ubevadai mirumes bezeh gufe gam tam pnimi yoser. In this reason itself that the Rambam gives here, there has to be hinted a deeper idea of improving the smell in the Beis HaMikdash. In this simple reason of the Rambam, you have hinted what it says in the Zohar, Sha'avedes HaKteiros hi lehavir hazuama v'tinoifa the Yetzer Hara. The idea of the Keteiros is that you remove the impurity and the dirt that comes from the Yetzer Hara. So the simple reason of removing the unpleasant smell and to replace it and to elevate it into having a pleasant smell of the Keteiros is the idea. Begashmius represents Beruchni as the concept of removing the unpleasantness of the impurity of the Yetzer Hara. And the Rebbe now shows us how you see this in the actual Keteiros itself, besides the idea of improving the aroma in the Beis HaMikdash. The ingredients of the Keteiros is made from different herbs and spices that are not fit for human consumption. Karbonis, one of the basic conditions is that it's an animal. You makriv an animal, a flower, or a bird, anything that's fit for human consumption. Has to be from the best, from the fattest. Not only in general that has to be fit for a person to eat, but it has to be fit for the individual on his level. An Oster can't bring a carbon of an ani. That's regarding karbonis. The keteiros that are just spices that are not fit for eating refers to an element of existence in the world that's very low. It's not fit for the person b'chlal. That's one detail we see as far as the ingredients of the keteiros itself. Another point there is one of the ingredients of the keteiros is chelbana, which actually has an unpleasant smell. And that actually indicates that we're talking over here not only about something that's not fit for human consumption, but it's even on a lower level. It's something that actually has a bad smell. And by bringing this to the Beis HaMikdash and doing it for the Eibishter's sake, the idea here is taking a low element of the world and elevating it and bringing it and using it for the Eibishter's sake, improving the smell in the Beis HaMikdash. But what you're really doing is you're taking something which is very low and elevating it into holiness. That's the basic theme of what the Aveda of the Keteiros is all about. To deal and with the Yetzer Hara, the impurity of the Yetzer Hara, and to elevate it into Kedusha. Hello, so the Rebbe continues, but now, Shal Pizein and moving klal. If that's what the whole Keteiros is all about, so then it's totally not understood. If the whole theme of the Keteiros is that you have an other side, you have a Yetzer Hara, and you have to deal with that existence and elevate it and so on. So ma'u atzayrich, u'ma'u atayeles, sheba'akteres, sheba'haktares akteres b'kodesh hakedoshim b'yom kippurim. So then what's the need and what's the purpose of the Ketores in the Kodesh HaKadoshim on Yom Kippur? She'oz ein l'soten shlita. Yom Kippur is a time where the Yetzer Hara has no free reign, and we're not dealing with the impurity of the Yetzer Hara. It says in many places, and this is a quote from the Gemara, B'yoyme di Kippuri les le reshusa le'estuni. On Yom Kippur, the Yetzer Hara doesn't have any permission to disturb. So Yom Kippur is not a day where the Avodah should be characterized by Ketores, that you have to elevate the Yetzer Hara and deal with the Yetzer Hara. So what's the idea of having Ketores in Yom Kippur? And the Rabbi in the Order 24 star points out that the question mainly over here is, if there would be Ketores on Yom Kippur, just like any other day of the year, it's just one detail of an Avodah that's done just like any other day, fine, okay, so that would be understood maybe. But the fact is that Ketores on Yom Kippur is considered to be the most central Avodah. That's like the main Avodah. When the Kohen Gadol goes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, it's with the Ketores. The main Avodah, it all revolves around the Ketores primarily. So why on Yom Kippur, where it's a time where there is no Yetzer Hara, there is no evil, at least not at the extent that it is on every day, but nevertheless, Dafka Yom Kippur, the main Avodah is with Ketores. So we must say, that the Ketores on Yom Kippur accomplishes something much greater, different. It's not similar, it doesn't accomplish in the same way that the Ketores accomplishes all year round. So let's understand what's the greater level of Ketores of Yom Kippur. So we could explain this based on what's explained. The Alter Rebbe here, the Rebbe is quoting from a few different places of the Alter Rebbe in Likutei Torah regarding tshuva. The Rebbe is going to give an introduction regarding tshuva and then apply it back to the Ketores. Sha'avedes ha'tshuva de Yom Kippurim, va'avedes ha'tshuva de Chol HaShana. You have the level of tshuva, the Avodah of tshuva of Yom Kippur, and the Avodah of tshuva all year round. They represent generally the two levels of tshuva that it speaks about in many places, which are tshuva miyaveh and tshuva miyirah. When a person does tshuva out of love, and a tshuva that comes from fear, from awe of Hashem. What's the difference? Avodas hatshuva d'chol hashana hi tshuva miyirah. The tshuva of all year is only on the level of yirah. Shal yada zedainis nasis lekishgagis. A tshuva that's done because of yirah, what does that accomplish? That premeditated sins become elevated and they are not considered to be like shgagis, like sins that were done by mistake. Tshuvas Yom Kippurim, hi tshuva meyava. It's a much greater level of tshuva, and therefore the effect of the tshuva is much greater. Shal yada is zedainis nasis lekizachiyos. Even zdainis will be totally transformed into merits. So there's a difference in the tshuva itself, whether it's ava or yireh, and also a difference in the result of the tshuva, how it affects the averis that the person did. The Rebbe goes a step further. V'yiseire mizu, averis hatshuva d'yom kippurim mi'tshuva ilah me'um kedeliba. This is a tshuva that's not only with love, as opposed to a tshuva from yireh, it's a tshuva that comes from the depth of the heart of the yid, pnimiyas alev, Aveda l'mayla mitam v'tas. On Yom Kippur, the Aveda is above reason and logic altogether, even above the regular level of Ava. Shemitzad b'chinas ha'yechida mizgala etzlai. This is a tshuva that comes from the essence of the neshama, the yechida of the neshama. Shebechlalos zeh inyan tshuva haba me'aveda b'chol ma'itcha. This is a tshuva that is a result of a love, of a very powerful love that a Yid has to the Eibishter, b'chol ma'itcha, a love that breaks all boundaries, above his seichel, above all of his boundaries. This is the kind of tshuva that is in the Aveda of a Yid, specifically on Yom Kippur, and not all year round. So now the Rebbe explains the accomplishment, the difference between the tshuva. Looking at the result of the tshuva, what the tshuva accomplishes, whether this dainis are turned into shkagis, or whether this dainis can be turned even into zachiyis, from that we'll understand the difference between these two levels of tshuva. So the difference, the two levels of tshuva, whether it's ava or yireh, is the reason for the difference in the result of what it accomplishes to the zedainis. Shehi lefi oifen bitulai. Depending on the avodah of the tshuva itself, to what extent the person is connecting to Hashem, to what extent he's annulling himself and rededicating himself to Hashem, that will also affect the result of the tshuva. To what extent it transforms the zedainis. When it comes to a tshuva happens out of the fear of the person. Yireh is not something where the person becomes completely bottled of the Eibishter. There's you, there's the servant, there's the master, and there's the greatness of the master and being in his presence, so it sort of overwhelms you and it annuls you. That's the concept of bittul. In such a case, an aveda of tshuva that comes from yireh, it's not a relationship of closeness where you're connecting and becoming one and losing yourself completely by being joined into the essence of or into the entity of the master. No. You are you, and the master is the master, and you're negating your being. You're putting aside your being while you're in the presence of the master. You feel the awe in his presence, and you mevatli yourself to the master. So therefore, if that's what characterizes the very tshuva itself, that you're just negating yourself for the master's sake, so there lahaver kol anyonim amenagdim, that a person removes any opposition, any of his own ideas, any of his own things because of the master. So the effect of this tshuva is also similar. It's here to negate, to remove the zedainis. That those zedainis, which are the negative, premeditated sins of the person, we will remove, we'll take away the zedainis. Ki'im kishgagis. And now it's only going to be considered shgagis. And ve'ein maskirin loy dava v'chatzi dava b'yoyim adin. With such a tshuva, it will ein maskirin, the Rebbe emphasizes, it's also in the negative. It won't be mentioned when it comes to the yoyim adin, these averis won't be mentioned. Aval mikol makim nisher roishim. It doesn't say that the person gets completely elevated and all these zedainis become transformed to become merits. In other words, in the positive sense, that it should be joined into the positive. It should be joined into becoming a mitzvah. That is not accomplished there. What happens is that just like the person negated his being, annulled his being in the presence of a master, so the effect of these dainis is the same. To elevate these zedainis to the extent that they themselves could now be joined into zachiyos and to be transformed and to become something totally new. A part of the zachiyos that hasn't been accomplished, just like the person didn't accomplish that relationship in his tshuva regarding himself. You don't have that result regarding the averis. But if there's a tshuva that's done with love, especially it's an ava of b'chol ma'idcha, as the Rebbe said before, that on Yom Kippur it's b'chol ma'idcha. Ava, what characterizes ava? Ava is where the person is drawn to someone. He's drawn, the person is elevating himself, and he's coming close and connecting. He's connecting to, not just there's the master and there's me. There's a relationship where he's drawing close and becoming one. In the positive sense of going and joining the Eibishter in this case. He's dedicating himself, not annulling himself, dedicating himself to the one he loves. Especially if it's not a dedication that has a limit, but a dedication with no limits. What's expressed in this tshuva is the desire to attach yourself and to be one with the Eibishter literally. So the tshuva in the person is that he becomes a new being. Instead of being who he was before as a separate entity, it's not only like in Yireh where you are still another entity outside of the master, it's just that you're negating yourself. No, you're coming close, dveikus, and becoming one. That's where this tshuva leads you. So then, it's this kind of tshuva that's also zdainis nasas like kazachias. The effect of the tshuva regarding those avedas that you did in the past also become elevated and transformed. Not only we negate their status of being premeditated sins, but they actually become transformed and elevated into a new status. They become part of the zachiyas. Transforming the curse into a bracha. The very zdainis themselves become transformed into a new being, similar to what characterizes the person's aveda itself. Rabbi adds another point. This is true about any tshuva meyava, especially a tshuva of ava b'chol moedcha. But any tshuva meyava is characterized by the fact that you're becoming one. Not that you're standing in awe, but you're becoming one with the one that you love. But even more so, there's another point here, when the tshuva is done without any limits, b'chol moedcha yesh b'zeh oidim. So here there's another concept. A tshuva that's above any limits, a person is connecting and gets elevated to a level of godliness that's above all limits, to the essence of the Eibishter. When you get elevated to the essence of the Eibishter, that's the source of where this transformation takes place. By the essence of the Eibishter, nothing's teifes makim. This dainis, zachias, since nothing's teifes makim by the essence of the Eibishter, so therefore that's where that transformation of dainis to zachias takes place. So before the Rebbe was talking about what characterizes your Aveda, that because your Aveda was about transforming yourself, so it has that effect on the Avedis as well. Here the Rebbe adds another point, mitzad the darga l'mayla you're reaching. When you reach a level where nothing is teifes makim l'mayla by the essence of the Eibishter, so then that is the cause for this change from zdainis to zachias, because you have the revelation of that level where zdainis and zachias by the Eibishter are not teifes makim. As the Rebbe explains more in order 29. So now we have explained there two different dargis in tshuva. Now the Rebbe applies this back to the two different dargis of the ketaitis. We could apply this to the difference between the ketaitis all year round and the ketaitis of Yom Kippur. Klolos avedis aktaitis. So the aved of ketaitis, as we said before, he lifal binyanim nemuchim v'la'aleisam l'kedusha. Kanal. It's taking the low elements of the world and elevating them to holiness. So hinei hachilok hu ba'ofen v'dargas pu'ula biruzeh. The difference here is in how, to what extent you're going to elevate this element, this tachton of the world, and bring it into the kedusha. How and to what extent? Similar to the two levels of tshuva that we just described. The ketaitis of all year is similar to the tshuva of all year. Tshuva miyira. Here the tshuva is yira, the person stands in awe of the Eibishter, and he annuls himself. To remove the impurity. That's the main thing that it's to accomplish. Not that the person gets elevated and transformed into a new being. The tshuva primarily is yira, where the person is mevatel himself, but even in this bittul is not that he gets joined together with the ohov, with the one that he loves. No, there's a yira, there's a odaim, and there's an eved, and it's two different entities, and the person is elevating himself through this yira, he's doing tshuva through this yira to remove the zuma, to remove the impurity. Ketaitis the Yom Kippurim, on the other hand, the Ketaitis of Yom Kippur, he al derech tshuva the Yom Kippurim. This is similar to the tshuva of Yom Kippur. It's a completely different kind of tshuva. Tshuva me'ava. This is a tshuva of ava. What's the aveda of tshuva me'ava? Shehi omnam aveda bahadvarim tachtainim zuma. Even the tshuva me'ava is also a kind of tshuva where a person has to deal with the low elements and with the impurity of the world. But this is a kind of tshuva where the person gets transformed. It's a tshuva me'ava. There's a relationship. He's becoming one with the one that he loves. Achi aveda chiyuvis. It's a positive aveda. Lifol mitzias chadasha ba'ilam. To bring about the new mitzias in himself and then by extension also in the Avedis, in the things of the world that he's coming in contact with, to elevate and to be joined, to become one with the Eibishter that he loves. They should be elevated and transformed into holiness, into Zachiyos. That's the difference between the Ketairis all year and the Ketairis of Yom Kippur. So, but now there's another point that the Rebbe said before, that the tshuva of Yom Kippur is not only a tshuva meyava, as opposed to the tshuva of Yireh, but it's a tshuva meyava b'chol ma'oitcha magiyim lebechinah shalamayla magbolis. So a person reaches to a level that's above any limitations. Yuvan gamatam la'aktaras akteres diyem kippurim b'kodesh hakadoshim dafke. This is the reason why the place of the Aveda, of the Ketairis and Yom Kippur was in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. That's the place which is above any limitations. Ein b'Kodesh HaKadoshim rak ha'oren. In the Kodesh HaKadoshim you have only the oren there. Ve'ein ba'oren rak shnei luchos v'kayim. And what is the oren? The oren is the Torah, the shnei luchos, the canal. As we mentioned before, Harei Avedis HaTshuva v'Ketairis, the Yom Kippurim, himiyaved b'chol moedcha. This is an Aveda of Ave. And specifically, the Aveda of Ava B'chol Moedcha, Beligvul, going out of your limitations. So therefore, Harezem Magia Ad L'Madregis HaOren. This is a kind of Aveda that reaches to the level of the Oren. What does the Oren represent? Madregis Shalamayla Medida Vagbala. The Oren was a place that was above limitations. As the Rebbe brings in Order 33, Makim Oren Einim in Amida. The very Oren itself had a specific measurement, but also didn't take up any space. It's above any limitations. So you bring the Ketairis into the Kodesh HaKadoshim and you put it by the Arayin because that's the place where you're getting elevated to, through the Aveda of the Tshuva of Yom Kippur. This brings about a change, a total change in the Metzias of the person and in the world. The Kodesh of the Beis HaMikdash is already very high. It's already Soiv Kalam. The Kodesh HaKadoshim is the essence of the Eibishter, higher than any limitations, and that's the place where the Tshuva and the Ketairis of Yom Kippur reaches, which doesn't only remove the impurity, but it transforms and elevates it to a place where the Zedainis could become Zachiyas. So now the Rebbe brings it back to the unique ingredient of the Maila Oshan. Why is it so important to have this ingredient that brings up a smoke? Why is the Maila Oshan a very critical condition in the Avodah of Yom Kippur, on the Ketairis of Yom Kippur? So much so that if not, a person's chayiv misa. Yom Kippurim in Yonai she'oila. Yom Kippur, the Avodah is that you're going up. L'mayla meseder ishtalshalis. A place higher than any limitations. That's what brings about a real transformation. So therefore, this is what the whole Aveda is about. So this Maila Oshan, which represents this idea that the Ketairis is not just about taking the incense, which are not royal cholodom, the low element of the world, and using it for an Aveda in the Beis HaMikdash. In other words, removing its impurity and bringing it into the Beis HaMikdash. That's not enough. Here, it's not just about removing the impurity of this low element. Over here, the main point is much further. To take the incense, the low element of the world, and create a transformation that instead it should be Maila. That there's a smoke that goes up. The fact that these low incense creates an aliyah, the Oshan that goes up. So it's dafke this Maila Oshan that represents the unique Aveda of Yom Kippur. Even all year round, there's to some degree this idea. You're creating to some degree a change. You're removing the zuama, and there's a certain extent of an aliyah that's taking place. But over there, the main aliyah is just by negating the zuama, by being mevatel, the impurity, that the Zedainis should not be Zedainis anymore. Yom Kippur, it's a different kind of aliyah. Yom Kippur, the whole focus, the whole Indian is the Maila Oshan. That instead of it being a tachtain, it's going up, that there's a smoke that goes up, which represents this whole chiddush of Yom Kippur. So therefore it's ma'akiv. And the Rebbe points out an interesting thing earlier in Orah 11, that even though this idea of maila, that it goes up, is just a physical thing, it's the physical smoke that goes up, but the Rebbe says, of course, the physical smoke that goes up represents beruchni, is the concept of aliyah going up. And the Rebbe points out from what it says in the Gemara, benegay to the halacha of a person that davens in a shul, that al yispal adam ela b'bayis sheyesh sham chalonis. You daven in a shul that should have windows. What's the windows? Because you can look up. The idea is not just physically to look up, but looking up is also reminding a person of the Yebishter to go maila, to go higher. In Order 11, the Rebbe brings this. So the same thing over here, the Maila Asham, the smoke that goes up and rises up to Shemayim, represents the aliyah of the Ketores, not just the removing of the Zuama, but the fact that it goes upwards. So this is mamish, an important ingredient in Yom Kippur. That's what characterizes the whole Aveda of the Ketores of Yom Kippur. All year, the main Aveda of the Ketores, which is connected to the Aveda of Tshuva Meira, is to negate the impurity. So there, if you're missing this ingredient of the Esav that causes the smoke to go up, it's not going to prevent the mitzvah to this extent. The Rebbe explains another thing. Maila Oshan, the smoke going up, shiyuroi, or this ingredient that you put in that makes the smoke go up, shiyuroi b'yom kippurim u'b'meila v'kol shekem b'chol hashana, the shir Yom Kippur, and also all year is kol shu. My Lord, we say this every day, kol shu, you put in just a kol shu. There's no specific amount, whatever it is. What's the idea of a kol shu? Ki ein adova koshor im minyanim shel medida v'agbala. This aliyah we're talking about over here, what kind of aliyah are we talking about? We're not talking about an aliyah al pitam v'das, an aliyah that has limits to it. We're talking about an aliyah that's l'mayla medida v'agbala. Kiyim keklolos avedis yom kippurim she b'pchinas yechida shel l'mayla agbala. This is an aveda that's higher than any limitations. So we see that the place where you put the ketores represents going up out of limitations. The orim enim min amida. The maila oshin shows an aliyah going up out of limitations, and therefore the actual amount is also a kol shu, because it's not a kind of aveda which is your contribution. It's your mitzias, which is measured, each person according to his level. It's a kol shu, which is the essence of the neshama of a yid that gets elevated. So this is the aveda of ketores in the Beis Hamikdash, and the Rebbe now explained the general theme of the aveda of the ketores is to elevate the lowest elements of the world. That's the samamonim of the ketores. And there's two levels to this. There's elevating it all year, which is primarily to remove the zuama. And then on Yom Kippur, it goes a step further. On Yom Kippur, we elevate this zuama, the lowest element of the year, to an extent that there's a mitzias chadasha. It's maila oshan to go up to a place which is higher than medida v'agbala. So now the Rebbe comes back to explain the connection to the aveda of the kayanim of blowing the chatzaitzres on Hakel. So now, based on all of this, so in this pasuk we see a remes for what the aveda of the ketores, that was the main aveda of the kayanim, which is what? That their aveda was to elevate the low elements of the world. And on two levels, to remove the impurity, and also the lifo mitzias chadasha ba'olam, to elevate it to a place and to a level that you totally transform it. Yishlevayer pirish atesefte shavedes hakayanim hi lahakal esa'am leishtatev b'mitzvahs hakal. That the unique aveda of the kayanim is to stand on the outskirts of Yerushalayim, inviting all Yidden to the mitzvah of hakal. Mikiven she'ikir inyan hakayanim hu lifail aliyas inyanim atachtainim. The main aveda of kainim is the ketores, which is about elevating the low elements of the world. And how? To elevate it to what extent? There's all year, but ultimately and primarily on Yom Kippur, to elevate it to the highest extent, to the Maila Oshan. So, the time of Hakel comes, so what happens at the time of Hakel? Shekol Yisrael, all Yidden, Gamanoshim, Vatav, the women, the children, Sheina Mechuyavim Lalas Leregel. For the regular Aliyah Leregel, they're not even obligated. Nikolam Ubam Lebeis HaMikdash L'Shmoya Teira Mipi HaMelech. They're coming to hear the words of Teira from the king. Shezu Kishmiya Mipi HaGvura, which is equivalent to hearing it from the Eibishter himself. And V'zois L'man Yishmu, L'man Yilmadu, V'yoru Es Hashem, to hear and to learn and to come to fear Hashem. Hainu. So the theme of the mitzvah of Hakel is Lifail B'kol Echad V'Echad Mi Yisrael. Everybody has to participate without exception. The pasuk specifies even people that usually are not obligated to participate, even those that are on a low level, also have to come. To elevate the lowest elements of Klal Yisrael, to include everybody into this closeness to the Eibishter. So hine, avodas hakayanim os ilo l'sayim b'zeh. So it's the kayanim that are the servants in the Beis Hamikdash, and their main avodah is to elevate the lowest elements of the world through the Ketores. So here in this mitzvah, which represents the same inyan, to gather all Yidden, without exception, even the lowest elements of Yidden, to awaken and to assist Yidden to come. Which is fitting to the main avodah of the Kayanim, to elevate and bring even the lowest elements of the world to connect to Hashem. So interesting, in Oster 39, the Rebbe points out that the Rambam says that the Kayanim are lihibadl, they're separated, lamed l'sharsai and huvdalu, they're higher and separated from everything. The Rebbe says that's just the preparation for their Aveda, to put them in the right setting for their Aveda. But the actual Aveda is Yasimu Ketayra. In the Beis Hamikdash, what is their Aveda? To take the incense, the lowest element of the world, and to elevate it into the Aveda of Ketayris. So the actual Aveda of the Kainim is also expressed here in Hakel by a mitzvah, one of the only mitzvahs, where you have every single part of Klal Yisrael included in this mitzvah without exception. Even those that usually feel left out and not included, here the Kainim have to make sure that every single Yid without exception comes, even the lowest element of Klal Yisrael. So this is a unique Aveda of the Kainim. So this is also the reason they go out to the fences, to the breaches, in the places where people are coming in. They don't wait in the Beis Hamikdash and blow with the trumpets there. They have to go on the outskirts, further out on the outside. And they blow there with their trumpets. Even people that are not already on the inside, they're still left on the outside. The Kayanim have to go out to them there and bring them into the Beis Hamikdash. This is the test of whether this is a Kayin that really is doing his Aveda properly. If the Kayin feels, yes, this is what my main Aveda is, and he goes out to gather even the people on the outskirts. So this retroactively proves that his attitude and his Aveda in the Beis Hamikdash the entire time was with the right approach, that he realizes that his main Aveda in the Beis Hamikdash is about elevating the lowest elements of the world, elevating it to the Eibishter. And if a Kayin does not go out, so then he's missing the whole main Aveda of what a Kayin is supposed to be doing, to elevate the lowest elements of the world. Now the Rebbe adds another point over here, that the Kayinim go out with the Chatzaitzres. And this is specifically connected not only to the general Aveda of the Kayinim in the Beis Hamikdash with the Ketores, which is about elevating the lowest elements of the world to a high place, but specifically the Ketores on Yom Kippur. They would go out and blow with trumpets. There's a vart of the Mezritcher Magid, Al HaPasuk V'asislo shtei chatzaitzres v'gaimer, the two chatzaitzres shepirushai shtei chatzoi tzuris, two half forms. Shakoi al Yisrael kutshevirichu, which refers to the Yidden and the Eibishter that make up one form. She Yisrael heim chatzi tzura, Yidden are one half form, the kutshevirichu kaviyachol chatzi tzura, and the Eibishter kaviyachol is another half of the form. Shneim biyachad nasim tzura shleimo. And the Eibishter and the Yidden together make up one form. The Yidden and the Eibishter are two parts that match to each other and come together and create one form. While derech drashas Chazal, this is similar to what it says in the Medrash, al HaPasuk tamasi loshen tomim, to be whole, te'umasi, like two twins that come together. So the Yidden and the Eibishter, in the Chatzaitzres, it's expressed that unity, that oneness, that Yidden and the Eibishter are joined together as one. So we'll move on. As long as a Yid is an entity for himself, and there's the Eibishter, As the Rabbi said before, there's the master and there's the servant. And the servant is very dedicated and he stands in awe of his master and serves him. But in the end of the day, there's the master and the servant. That's one thing. But over here, we're talking about Yidden that become joined as one with the Eibishter himself. That transforms the person into a new entity. And without this, a person is incomplete. We explained before that in the Avodah of the Ketores and Yom Kippur, here you see that the Avodah of the Kohanim is not just about elevating the lowest elements of the world, but it's about elevating those elements and joining them together with their source in a place of Bli Gvul to become one, to become a new entity with the Eibishter himself. When the Kohen goes out to invite all Yidden, he doesn't just go out and encourage Yidden to come, but he's using trumpets. It's with the Chatzaitzres that you see the Avodah of a Kohen, that he's not just bringing and inviting the Yidden, but he's revealing within the Yidden and awakening within them and transforming them to become a new Metzias, to become one with the Eibishter. That's what the Chatzaitzes represents. He's inviting the Yidden and awakening the Yidden, that Yechidische Benefesh, which is the Avodah, the main Avodah of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, which represents the main Avodah of the Kohanim, to elevate them to this extent. That's what a Kohen really has to be doing when he's going out to invite people, to arouse the essence of their soul, to come and join in the mitzvah of Hakel. So we can see here how when the Kohen goes out, you have two details. The fact that the Kohen goes out and he doesn't miss any Yid. The point is to include all elements of Klal Yisrael. That's the idea represented in the Ketores, which is to elevate the lowest elements of the world to get elevated into Kedusha. And then the Chatzaitzres also hints to the second point, the deeper level of Ketores of Yom Kippur, which is to elevate it to the point that you arouse within a Yid to become one with Eibishter, to a place of Bli Gvul. The lesson that we take of all of this is as follows. Even those mitzvahs that are dependent on time and place, in their spiritual sense, they exist always and in every place. The Hayrah in a person's Avodah is even in a time when you can't fulfill it. So it's understood here as well. Shemitzvahs hakel. It's a mitzvah that is fulfilled only when Yidden are in Eretz Yisrael. But in its spiritual content, it's even today as well. Every single Yid is referred to as a Kohen. Speaking to all Yidden. So hine tzarich kol echad ve'echad lisnaig bekama v'kama man hagas hakohanim. Every Yid has to behave in many of the ways that the Kohanim behave as well in their Avodah. Al kol echad ve'echad, every single person. Ubefrat al elu shemekanim b'turah v'chulu v'lehem hashpa b'svivasam. Especially individuals that are serving as a rav in a community, or anyone that has any hashpa in their surroundings. Mutl ha'chayv Lamed bechutzais bigdarim upirtzais v'litkaya b'chatzaitzres v'lahakalasam, to stand on the outside and in places where there are breaches, the Rebbe emphasizes pirtzis, and to blow with the chatzaitzres, and to invite everyone to come in. Anoshim, noshim v'taf. Everybody, men, women, and children, even those that you think are not usually to be included, but to be there and to encourage everybody to join in. Lilmaid, v'lishmaya Torah, to learn Torah, to listen to the words of Torah, v'lekarven al amor shebetorah. Not only to learn Torah with them, but specifically to connect them to the light of Torah, hipnimiyas haTorah. Ad sheyiflu behen yishmu yilmedu v'shamru lases is called divrei haTorah azayis kiyum haTorah mitzvaseh b'yiras shamayim, to fulfill Torah with yiras shamayim. So the mar shebetorah, connecting Yidden to the pnimiyas haTorah, so the Rebbe in the Hara points out, is connected specifically to the Ketores of Yom Kippur, which awakens the Yechidische Benefesh, the higher level of Tshuva. So we're talking over here about every Yid, and especially a person that has a position of influence, to go out and to reach the lowest elements, to reach everybody. And what to awaken in them? To awaken their neshama, to awaken the deepest level within the Yid, which is one with the Eibishter, as we said before, represented in the Chatzaitzres. Through fulfilling the mitzvah of Hakel today in its spiritual sense. Niske lekiyum mitzvahs Hakel kipshuta bebeis hamikdash hashlishi will fulfill the mitzvah of Hakel literally in the third beis hamikdash. Al Yidei Shashem Yisbarach Yakel es Kol Yisrael. The Yidden will, the Eibishter will be the one to gather all Yidden. Bam Iver Upiseach Harav Yeledes Yachtov. A blind and limping person and all old and young will come together. Fishel Kol Gadol Yeshuvo Heina. The great congregation of all Yidden will come together. Uvov v'ishtachvu l'Hashem b'hara kodesh b'Yerushalayim b'bias Mashiach tzidkenu b'karev mamish.